The Islamic State, also known as ISIS, ISIL, or Daesh, was not simply a terrorist group in the usual sense. At its peak, it tried to function as a state, collecting money, enforcing rules, running prisons, controlling roads, producing propaganda, and commanding fighters across a large area of Iraq and Syria. In 2014, it declared a worldwide caliphate and claimed authority over Muslims everywhere. That claim was rejected by the overwhelming majority of Muslims and by governments around the world, including many Muslim-majority states. The United Nations and numerous countries designate the group as a terrorist organization. To understand why it mattered, we have to look at both sides of its identity: a militant organization built around extreme violence, and a short-lived territorial project that ruled millions through fear. The Islamic State did not appear out of nowhere in 2014. Its roots go back to the chaos that followed the 2003 invasion of Iraq and the insurgency that developed afterward. One important predecessor was linked to the jihadist networks operating in Iraq during that period, including Al-Qaeda in Iraq. These groups exploited the collapse of state institutions, sectarian tensions, foreign occupation, and the growth of armed militias. Over time, the organization changed names and leadership structures, but its core strategy remained consistent: use extreme violence to provoke fear, polarize communities, and present itself as the defender of one side in a wider conflict. The future Islamic State grew in the cracks of broken governance, civil war, and regional instability. The group's rise accelerated during the Syrian civil war. Syria's state authority fractured after 2011, and large areas became contested among the government, rebel factions, Kurdish forces, jihadist groups, and foreign-backed militias. This environment gave the Islamic State room to expand from Iraq into Syria. It captured weapons, recruited fighters, and took advantage of porous borders. The group did not merely fight conventional battles; it built networks for taxation, smuggling, extortion, and control over local populations. The wars in Iraq and Syria became connected, and the group used that connection strategically. When pressure grew in one place, it could shift resources to another. This cross-border flexibility made it far more dangerous than a local insurgent movement. In 2014, the Islamic State seized global attention by capturing major territory, including the Iraqi city of Mosul. The fall of Mosul was a shock because it showed how quickly a well-organized militant force could defeat or scatter local security forces. The group gained money, weapons, vehicles, and prestige. Soon after, it proclaimed itself a caliphate and shortened its name to the Islamic State. This declaration was central to its propaganda. It presented territorial control as proof of divine legitimacy and tried to attract recruits from around the world. But in practice, the so-called caliphate was built through coercion, executions, hostage-taking, forced conformity, and the crushing of anyone who resisted its rule. At its height, the Islamic State controlled an area populated by millions of people. By the end of 2015, estimates suggested roughly 12 million people lived under its rule. The group managed a large budget, reportedly exceeding $1 billion annually, and commanded tens of thousands of fighters. Its revenue came from several sources, including oil smuggling, taxation, confiscation, ransom, looting, and control of trade routes. This financial base helped it pay fighters, buy supplies, and maintain a bureaucratic system. But its governance was never normal state building. It was a war economy enforced by terror. Public punishment, surveillance, ideological policing, and collective intimidation were tools used to make resistance feel impossible. The Islamic State became infamous for extraordinary brutality. It committed genocide against Yazidis and targeted Iraqi Turkmen, Christians, Shia Muslims, Mandaeans, and others it labeled as enemies or heretics. Yazidi communities were especially devastated, with mass killings, forced displacement, enslavement, and systematic abuse. The group also publicized videos of beheadings of soldiers, journalists, and aid workers, using violence as both punishment and propaganda. These acts were designed to terrify opponents, attract extremists, and dominate the information space. Its brutality was not random, it was part of a strategy. By making cruelty visible, the group tried to project strength, discourage rebellion, and provoke international reaction that it could then use in recruitment messaging. Culture and history also became targets. The Islamic State destroyed religious shrines, archaeological sites, museums, and ancient monuments in areas it controlled. These attacks were framed by the group as ideological acts, but they also served practical purposes, erasing pluralistic heritage, intimidating local communities, and generating global publicity. In some cases, antiquities were looted and trafficked, turning cultural destruction into another revenue stream. The destruction of heritage sites in Iraq and Syria shocked the world because these places connected modern societies to thousands of years of human history. The group's campaign against culture showed that its violence was aimed not only at people, but also at memory, identity, and coexistence. Propaganda was one of the Islamic State's most powerful tools. The group used videos, magazines, social media, and encrypted communication to reach audiences far beyond Iraq and Syria. Its media output tried to sell two messages at once: fear for enemies, and belonging for potential recruits. It presented controlled territory as a utopian project while hiding the reality of repression, poverty, and constant war. It also encouraged supporters abroad to carry out attacks where they lived. This helped inspire or claim responsibility for violence outside its core territory, including massacres in Europe, the Middle East, and elsewhere. The group understood that modern terrorism is not only physical violence, it is also psychological and digital warfare. The international response grew as the Islamic State expanded. Iraqi forces, Kurdish forces, the Syrian Democratic Forces, and local militias fought it on the ground. A United States-led coalition provided airstrikes, training, weapons, intelligence, and logistical support. Iran-backed forces also fought against it in Iraq and Syria. Russia intervened in Syria as well, though its air campaign often focused heavily on Syrian opposition strongholds rather than exclusively on Islamic State positions. The fight was complex because the Islamic State existed inside overlapping wars: the Iraqi state's struggle to restore control, the Syrian civil war, Kurdish autonomy efforts, regional rivalries, and global counterterrorism campaigns. Defeating it required not one battle, but years of coordinated military pressure. From 2015 onward, the Islamic State began losing the conditions that had made its caliphate possible. Airstrikes weakened its command centers, oil infrastructure, and supply lines. Ground forces retook towns and cities, often block by block. The battle for Mosul and the campaign in eastern Syria were especially destructive and costly. As territory shrank, the group lost tax revenue, recruitment momentum, and the image of unstoppable expansion that had fueled its propaganda. By March 2019, it had lost its last significant territory in West Asia. The territorial caliphate was gone, but the organization itself was not eliminated. Many fighters were killed or captured, but others dispersed into deserts, rural hideouts, prisons, camps, and underground networks. After losing its territory in Iraq and Syria, the Islamic State reverted to insurgency. This means smaller cells, ambushes, assassinations, bombings, extortion, and attempts to exploit weak governance. Insurgencies can survive without holding major cities, especially in remote areas where state control is limited. The group also continued to claim attacks abroad and maintain propaganda channels. Its affiliates became increasingly important, especially in parts of Africa, including northern and Sahelian regions where conflict, poverty, local grievances, and weak institutions create openings for militant expansion. These affiliates are not always controlled in a simple top-down way, but they benefit from the Islamic State brand, ideology, media ecosystem, and global notoriety. The story of the Islamic State is a warning about how extremist movements can grow when war, state collapse, sectarian fear, and propaganda reinforce one another. Its self-declared caliphate was destroyed territorially, but the conditions that allowed it to rise have not disappeared everywhere. Prisons holding former fighters, displaced communities, unresolved conflicts, and fragile governments all remain long-term security challenges. At the same time, the group's claim to represent Islam was overwhelmingly rejected by Muslims worldwide, and its rule brought devastation to Muslim and non-Muslim communities alike. Understanding the Islamic State means looking beyond its shocking violence to the political breakdowns, financial systems, recruitment methods, and information strategies that allowed it to become so dangerous. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.